If you're part of a spiritual or faith community and you frequently have feelings of guilt and shame, fear, your gut tells you something's not right when you're questioned by leaders or asked to do certain things that feel like self-abandonment, but you're afraid to say anything out of getting ostracized by the community or fearing divine punishment, you may be suffering from spiritual or religious abuse. Hi, my name is John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, certified trauma specialist, and co-founder of Hawkins Counseling Center. This is a topic I'm extremely passionate about. As a trauma specialist, in my opinion and experience, spiritual abuse and trauma is the most impactful, most wounding of all types of trauma. Because if you're abusing me physically, sexually, emotionally, at some point I'm gonna die and the abuse will stop. With spiritual and religious abuse, it can go even deeper. It can destroy one's sense of meaning and purpose, trust in whatever divine source you believe in or higher power, and it's eternal the way it's taught. So then it never ends. So it's the most terrifying form of abuse for me. So in this video, I'm gonna show you 9 hidden signs of spiritual abuse, because one of the things I've learned about with spiritual abuse is it's often very hidden and insidious. So it's hard for the person to recognize, sometimes only come to awareness of it years or decades later. Or some of the closest people in their life may not recognize it, or they may all collaboratively be part of that community, all suffering from this thing, and nobody is realizing it till way later when so much damage has been done. So let me start by defining spiritual religious abuse. So I'm gonna use those terms synonymously throughout this video. So if I say religious or spiritual, for the sake of this video, it means the same thing. So for me, spiritual abuse is defined as misuse by religious authorities to control, manipulate, or harm someone with intent to gain status, power, control, money, whatever that thing may be, affirmation about their self-worth, but it's done with intention. And I would say sometimes I've been part of different faith communities throughout my history where people have kind of internalized these belief systems and never questioned them. So it's still abusive in my opinion, but it may be done out of ignorance. But the ones I'm really talking about today, and that needs to be addressed as well, but the stuff we're talking about today is leaders who are doing this with intention. And furthermore, it can take many forms, from emotional and psychological manipulation to physical harm to exploitation of women, children, preying on people financially, all these kind of things that are done, again, with intention to harm and to obtain these things in a narcissistic manner. The first one is manipulation of faith and trust. A lot of these leaders are seen as benevolent and trustworthy, and they use this to prey on people's sense of, wanting connection, affirmation from authority figures, and then they justify a lot of their abusive behaviors in the name of faith or spiritual guidance. One of the things that makes my skin crawl is when somebody goes up to another person and tells them, God told me. I'm not saying there's never, ever like a space for somebody, receiving something that they feel like could benefit the other person. But this is not the case in these kind of situations. This is done in a manipulative thing. God told me that your wife is supposed to have sex with me so I can carry on God's seed through her. God told me to have sex with your underage daughter because I can initiate her into the kingdom of spirituality and God and all these kind of things. Or God told me that you're supposed to, break out your checkbook and create, give us this huge amount of money so we can spread, the message of God. And it's done in this very manipulative way. And the last thing I'll say about this, again, is when you see this person as speaking and representing God or being so benevolent and trustworthy, then people are highly unlikely to question them. Or there's kind of this mass hypnosis that can take place in communities where nobody questions anything. And then those who are due, which we're going to talk about another sign in a second, fear bringing that out for different reasons. Number 2 is the use of fear and coercion. So victims are often threatened with divine punishment or ostracization from the community, or there's omission as well, like you won't receive a blessing or God won't reward you or be proud of you. And so they use these tactics to manipulate people into, again, sexual activity, finances, service, putting in long hours as a volunteer. And then if you feel, in any way negatively affected by that, like you're exhausted or you're, mentally or physically being wiped out, and you ask time off, or I really needed to spend time with my daughter this weekend, then you're shamed or coerced. Well, you're abandoning your brotherhood or sisterhood or these kind of things. So recognize that as again a manipulative tactic. Number 3 is isolation. Religious abuse often involves isolating people from external sources of support and information. And so that could be physically isolating you, particularly when you're younger in childhood and adolescence, or even some adults, but also emotionally isolating you, where we pull away approval, love, acceptance if you don't line up with these things we want you to do. If you're cut off from alternative perspectives or other sources of information, you're kind of in a box that you can't find your way out of. And oftentimes people are threatened that if you question the box or take a peek outside, you're putting your eternal soul at risk. I know there was different things from faith communities I was a part of throughout my history, where as I got to see more and more outside perspectives and alternative viewpoints, then I was able to see things that weren't so healthy, or start to kind of walk out of that box into a place of freedom. Number 4 is a big one, and this is, inducing feelings of guilt and shame. So, that's one of with the fear and coercion, I would say this is another of the biggest weapons of spiritual and religious abusers, is the use of guilt and shame. So many faith systems start out with this, God is so loving and benevolent and all good, but you're so worthless and you're so depraved and you're so awful that God is doing you this massive favor of accepting you, even though you're so unbelievably worthless. And I just can't imagine that. I've seen that used with my children. I would never want them to feel that way coming towards me. I would never want them to walk with their head down, like afraid to look up at me, or just fearing my disapproval. And this is the religious and spiritual views that so many people are taught. And this is in so many communities, and I'm not here to denigrate any faith community, any spiritual community, but over the course of 55 years, I have seen this prevalent in all communities. So whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, a yoga group, a Buddhist meditation group, this shows up everywhere because people show up everywhere, and people have wounds, and leaders have wounds. And so when people come into these communities, they're longing for healing, to be de-shamed, to have love, compassion, and many of these communities offer that. And so I don't want to label all spiritual and faith communities in any way, because we need connection and community, we need meaning and purpose, we need some connection to something greater than ourselves. But it's when people take these things and these longings that we all have at the deepest level, and these wounds that we all carry, and they manipulate them and use them to their own benefit. And so then it's hard to even feel worthy to ask questions, or I feel guilty for even thinking these internally. I've seen so many people over the years, as I help them heal from these kind of things, they couldn't even talk about them for years or decades sometimes, because they felt so guilty for even having the thoughts or questioning the existence of God, and they didn't have a safe space to explore these things. They were just, again, pounded with guilt, fear, and shame. Number 5 is cultural and religious norms. And as a psychotherapist, it's big for me. I want to make space for all people's cultures, viewpoints, all these things, and not impose mine in any way. But within some of these communities, there's things that are just, unacceptable and harmful, like emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, but they're not questioned because it's part of that community's belief system, or that leader's interpretation of that belief system. And so there's things that in any secular context would be grounds for, imprisonment, like having sex with minors, or manipulating people into, writing out checks and dumping out their bank accounts, or again, serving in these abusive ways where you're just exploiting people. But it's acceptable in these contexts, and nobody questions it. Number 6, I think, is probably the biggest of all, and that's just lack of awareness. So I know for me, there was healthy things I got from some of the spiritual communities I grew up in, some very abusive and toxic things that I got. And so I had to, over many years, as I kept seeking out truth and exposing myself to different alternative ideas, where you started to see things. And when you're in it, you just can't see it. Like so many things, not just spiritual and religious, but psychological. And so, people who put out videos like this, like myself and others, we're desperately trying to educate people so you can break free from these abusive and toxic environments. But if you're watching this video, you're doing one of the primary first steps, which is gain awareness of what is happening. And you may have to do this all by yourself because you're embedded in a community that's not safe to start asking these kind of questions, or you're going to get, again, shamed, coerced, manipulated, all these gaslighted, all these kind of things. So that leads into number 7, which is psychological manipulation. Again, a big tactic for religious and spiritual abusers. So I just mentioned the term gaslighting, and that's when, with intent, I'm trying to get you to doubt your perspective, your emotional experience, your views. So I may have, again, this intuitive sense, which for me is really on point. It's picking up on things the cognitive mind can't. And so something doesn't sit right with you or feel good. And maybe you go in a very respectful way. And I've had this happen to so many clients where they go ask a leader, a respectful question, and then they get gaslighted. Well, that's just a sign that you don't have enough faith, or that's the enemy speaking to you, or we think that you might have, evil spirits or demons, and so we need to cast those out, which then, terrifies the person and they feel, vulnerable. Number 8, we've kind of alluded to in some of these other ones, and that's fear of repercussions. So again, that could be pulling away of love, acceptance, approval, ostracization. And so you end up in this, really stuck internal place where I have these questions, but I'm afraid to answer it. I've seen that, again, many times where somebody reaches out to somebody they think is safe or might have some of these questions, but everybody's living in such a state of fear and shame that somebody goes and tells one of the leaders that you came and you started asking these questions or disagreed with something or something didn't seem right with you or you felt like that was wrong morally. And then this person, to either gain approval or out of their own fear, will bring these leaders back, and then all those things happen, the ostracization, the punitive punishments, that you can earn your way back into favored status in the group. And the last one, number 9, is spiritual confusion. And this may really resonate with you. So you're having, again, intuitive questions, or, that's part of the faith journey, is to question things, and is that real or true? Is it in my head? This doesn't seem right to me. That does seem right, but people are telling me it's wrong, or it doesn't feel bad to me in my felt sense of it. And so you need, again, a safe space, an environment, an incubator, so to speak, to flesh all this stuff out. But it's not safe to do that in the environment you're in. Or you're going to get, again, labeled, ostracized, all these things, guilt and shamed. And the way the brain works is you can't sort that stuff out internally. You need to activate the left brain to start to make sense of all these intuitive feelings you're having, or these, thoughts, and they're kind of like chunky and in pieces. When we speak, when we write, we start to bring order to them, to have, a safe sounding board that you can start to discuss these things, to find clarity on them, or get validation, to trust your thinking. And so this all blends into the psychological, emotional stuff as well. So many of my clients who were prone to getting spiritually or religiously abused often had emotional abuse. And so growing up, whether it was invalidation, whether it was, punishment, harsh discipline that was abusive, they couldn't get what they needed developmentally to trust their emotional experience or trust their perception of reality. So now you put that into these spiritual religious communities, and again, leaders that are abusive exploit this confusion, and you can't trust. So you're very prone to getting gaslit, those kind of things. So for me, there's a level of it. You can grow up in these environments from very young and get kind of indoctrinated because it didn't welcome why and questioning and critical thought. But then when you grow up, you have a hard time trusting my emotional or cognitive experience, and so that's why you're so vulnerable to these kind of things. So recognizing the signs of spiritual and religious abuse is the first step to healing it. And, like I said, many of these things are so hidden and insidious, or so subtle. So you might go in a community that's more extreme, like a cult, where, people are committing mass suicide, or, this like polygamy with minors. It's like the average person is like, okay, that's pretty messed up and toxic. But many of these other signs are so subtle and hidden. And like I said, there's the toxic leaders up here, but then there can be many good people down here who just haven't questioned, or who've been the victim of this stuff, who are perpetuating it out of ignorance, and that them to be good people often. But they've not gone on this journey of like healing emotionally, spiritually, and questioning these things sufficiently. So then they're part of this whole thing, complicitly, they're like the unconscious getaway driver. And so it can be really difficult in those environments to find an empathetic ear, or, like, if you're really operating from a place of love and compassion, all questions should be welcome, all thoughts should be explored, all feelings in a safe place where you can get clarity for yourself about your views on these things. So in my next video, that's going to be part 2 of this 2-part series, I'm going to get into 7 steps of how to actually start to heal from spiritual and religious abuse. So if you watch this video, I hope that gave you the signs that you can start to recognize whether I or somebody I love and care about is being spiritually or religiously abused. I think with the advent of the internet and the access to information, these things are ever shrinking. It's harder and harder to get away with them. More and more people are questioning these things, but it still goes on. And like I said, it's no community is exempt. So I've seen people leave traditional faith communities, like Christianity, Judaism, other things, and then go into these more like open spiritual communities, and then they find the exact same thing, because they're very difficult. To be a really healthy person takes a lot of work. And so what happens is a lot of these leaders have deep wounds around shame, and they perpetuate shaming others through this like compensation to get all this attention and adoration. That's why you see all this affairs and sexual abuse and all these things behind the scenes from these narcissistic, toxic leaders that are so damaged, but everyone idolizes them. I remember years ago sitting in a church where this person was really renowned, published books, he was flying all over the country and world speaking, but the stuff he was saying was so shaming and fear-based and wrong. And I'm looking around and I'm like, am I in the twilight zone? Am I the only one who's saying this? But they're not questioning him because he's speaking so eloquently and he's so renowned. And I got up and just walked out and never went back in there. I was like, this is horrible. Like, it's like, again, like this mass delusion that we have to be able to ask why. So I hope you join us in the second video, where we're going to walk through 7 signs to heal and recover from spiritual and emotional abuse. So if you've watched this whole video, I appreciate it. Thank you. If you found it useful, I'm super happy about that. And then please forward to anyone you think could be a victim of spiritual or emotional abuse that could benefit from the video. If you'd like more information on this topic, I can load you up with a bibliotherapy. We call it a list of great books around this. That's been some of my greatest resources on the journey towards spiritual healing, was educating myself and then doing deeper and spiritual work around that. And if you're interested in that, or like I said, you'd like to speak with my wife and I, Basan, you can reach us anytime at hawkinscounselingcenter.com. Again, thank you, and we'll see you in video number 2.